Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Her True Stories. I'm your host, bringing you another tale that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family, betrayal, and the price of taking someone's love for granted. Today's story comes from Isabella, a 59-year-old woman whose son thought he could use her generosity without consequence. Sometimes the most elegant revenge comes wrapped in silk and tied with a perfect bow. Let's dive in. My name is Isabella Van Doren, though most people call me Belle, and I suppose that morning started like any other Tuesday in my perfectly ordered life. I was 59 then, standing in my marble kitchen overlooking the Pacific, watching the morning light dance across waves that had witnessed more secrets than any confessor. The house was silent except for the gentle hum of my espresso machine and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below. I'd built this sanctuary after my divorce 15 years ago, a fortress of glass and steel where betrayal couldn't reach me. Or so I thought. I was wearing my silk robe, the champagne-colored one that made my blonde hair catch the light just right, when my phone rang. Hunter's name flashed across the screen, and despite everything he'd put me through over the years, my heart still did that little skip it had done since the day he was born. "Good morning, darling," I answered, settling into my favorite chair by the window. "Hey, Mom." His voice carried that particular tone I'd learned to recognize, the one he used when he wanted something. "I've got some news." I waited. Patience had become my greatest weapon over the years. "Sloan and I got married last week." The words hit me like ice water. I set my espresso cup down very carefully, my hands steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Last week. My only child had gotten married, and I wasn't invited. Hadn't even been told. "Congratulations, Hunter," I managed, my voice smooth as velvet. "How wonderful." "Yeah, it was perfect. Just us and a few friends in Malibu. You know how Sloan likes things intimate." He paused, and I could hear her giggling in the background. "Listen, we're planning our honeymoon, and Sloan fell in love with your beach house when we were there for Christmas. Could you send us the keys? She wants to watch the sunrise over the water." Not even a real invitation. Not even an acknowledgement of what this meant. Just send the keys, like I was the concierge at some luxury hotel. My son, the child I'd raised alone after his father abandoned us, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, had reduced me to a key dispenser. "Of course, darling," I said, my smile evident in my voice even though my heart was crystallizing into something sharp and cold. "I'll make sure you have everything you need." "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." "Oh, and don't worry about stocking the house or anything. We'll handle all that."
Don't worry about it.
Like I was some hovering mother-in-law instead of the woman who'd given him everything, including apparently the perfect honeymoon destination. "I wouldn't dream of interfering," I said. "Enjoy your time together." I ended the call and sat in perfect stillness for exactly 5 minutes, watching the waves below crash against the rocks with relentless, beautiful violence. Then I smiled, not the practice smile I'd worn through charity galas and business meetings, but something else entirely. Something that would have made my ex-husband remember why he'd been afraid of me toward the end. Before we continue with Belle's story, let me pause here for a moment. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt that sharp sting of being taken for granted by someone you love, then you're in the right place. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Ring that notification bell because, trust me, you won't want to miss what Belle does next. And while you're at it, drop a comment below. Have you ever been excluded from something important by your own family? Let's build a community where we support each other through these painful moments. Now, back to Belle's story, because things are about to get very interesting. To understand what came next, you need to understand Hunter, my beautiful, golden boy who'd learned early that his smile could open any door and his charm could smooth over any transgression. After I ended the call, I found myself walking through my house, past the photographs that told the story of our relationship. There he was at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding the trophy from his first tennis tournament, the one I'd paid for, driven him to every lesson, cheered from the sidelines in rain and blazing sun. At 10, graduating from that exclusive private school where I'd served on every committee to ensure he got the best education money could buy. At 16, keys to his first car dangling from his fingers while I smiled behind him, already invisible in his world of possibility. I'd been 25 when Hunter was born, married to a man who claimed he wanted a family right up until the reality of sleepless nights and endless responsibility set in. Marcus left when Hunter was 3, citing incompatible life goals and different visions for the future. What he meant was that being a father was harder than he'd expected, and I was stronger than he'd bargained for. So, I raised Hunter alone. I built my art-dealing business from nothing, working 18-hour days while he slept, flying to galleries in Milan and auctions in New York. Also, he could have the life I dreamed of giving him. Private schools, summer camps in Switzerland, college at Stanford, and afterward, seed money for his real estate ventures that he treated like expensive hobbies. The first time I met Sloane, she was 26 to his 31, with that particular brand of beauty that came from good genetics and better plastic surgeons. Blonde like me, but harder somehow, with calculating blue eyes that cataloged the worth of everything they touched. She'd walked through my beach house that Christmas, her fingers trailing over surfaces, her gaze lingering on the ocean view, the imported Italian marble, the wine collection I'd spent decades curating. "This place is incredible, Mrs. Van Doren," she'd said, her voice honey-sweet. Hunter is so lucky to have such an amazing mom. But her eyes weren't on Hunter when she said it. They were in the house, already imagining themselves as its mistress. I should have seen it then. The way she positioned herself in photos showed off the backdrop of my home. How she posted endless Instagram stories from the most beautiful beach house, never mentioning whose generosity made those posts possible. How she encouraged Hunter to take and take and take, always with that supportive smile that said she deserved whatever he could provide. The warning signs had been there for months. Phone calls that went unanswered. Holidays where Hunter was too busy to visit, but somehow found time to post pictures of lavish vacations. The gradual realization that I'd become someone to manage rather than someone to love. And now this. Marriage without invitation, honeymoon in my house without a hint of gratitude, just expectation. As if my decades of love and sacrifice had earned me nothing more than the right to provide services when requested. I poured myself a second espresso and called my housekeeper. "Maria, I need you to prepare the beach house for guests. My son and his new wife will be staying there." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "And please, make sure everything is absolutely perfect. This is a very special occasion." By noon, I was seated across from Margot Ellsworth at our usual table at Seacliff, the kind of restaurant where conversations about revenge could be disguised as discussions about wine pairings. Margot had been my closest friend for over 20 years, ever since we'd met at a charity auction where we'd both been bidding on the same Monet. We'd ended up splitting the cost and sharing custody of it, 6 months in her penthouse, 6 months in mine. At 62, Margot was sharp as a blade and twice as cutting when necessary. She'd been the editor-in-chief of Couture for 15 years before retiring to write scathing reviews of restaurants that disappointed her. Her silver hair was pulled back in her signature chignon, and her black Chanel suit made her look like she could negotiate peace treaties or start wars with equal efficiency. "You look murderous," she said without preamble, signaling for champagne before we'd even been seated 5 minutes. "Hunter got married last week." I kept my voice level, but Margot had known me too long to miss the undertone. "And you found out how?" "He called this morning to ask for the keys to the beach house." For their honeymoon. Margot's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose. He didn't invite you to the wedding? Apparently, it was intimate. Just them and a few friends. The champagne arrived Dom Perignon because Margot believed that certain conversations required proper lubrication. She poured 2 glasses with the precision of a surgeon, then raised hers in a mock toast. To Hunter, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, who clearly learned his manners from wolves. We clinked glasses, and I took a sip, letting the bubbles explode against my palate. I gave him everything, Margot. Everything. And this is how he repays me? Like I'm some distant relative he tolerates for her inheritance potential? What did you say when he called? I was charming. Supportive. I told him I'd make sure they had everything they needed. Margot's eyes glittered dangerously. Please tell me you're not actually planning to just hand over the keys like some grateful doormat. I smiled then. The same smile I'd worn when I'd outbid 3 major galleries for a Picasso sketch, knowing they'd underestimated the quiet blonde in the corner. Oh, I'm absolutely going to give them everything they need. But I never said they'd enjoy it.
Belle.
Margot leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. What are you planning? I signaled for oysters, kushi, the kind that cost $40 a dozen and were worth every penny. Do you remember that bottle of Bordeaux I bought at the Sotheby's auction 2 years ago? The 1967 Chateau Margaux. The one you paid $50,000 for? You've been saving it for a special occasion. Well, I said, letting the silence stretch between us like a silk cord, it seems that special occasion has arrived. Margot stared at me for a long moment, then began to laugh. Not her public laugh, but the genuine one reserved for moments of pure, delicious wickedness. Belle Van Doren, you beautiful, terrible woman. What exactly are you planning to do with that wine? I took another sip of champagne, savoring both the taste and the moment. I'm going to give the happy couple a wedding gift they'll never forget. My wine collection lived in the basement of my house, in a climate-controlled room that had cost more than most people's cars. Temperature at exactly 55 degrees, humidity at 60%, the bottles cradled in custom oak racks like sleeping infants. This wasn't just storage, this was a cathedral to patience and sophistication. I found the Bordeaux exactly where I'd placed it 2 years ago, nestled between a 1982 Lafite and a 1990 Romanée-Conti. The label was pristine, the seal unbroken, the glass dark with decades of mystery. $50,000 for a bottle that had waited 56 years to fulfill its purpose. Some might call that excessive, but I preferred to think of it as destiny. But wine alone, no matter how rare, wouldn't accomplish what I had in mind. For that, I needed to make a call to someone who understood the art of discretion. Dr. Adrian Blackwell had been my physician for 12 years, ever since he'd treated me for stress-related insomnia during my particularly brutal divorce. He was the kind of doctor who made house calls for the right clientele, who understood that sometimes healing required methods not found in medical textbooks. More importantly, he was someone who never asked unnecessary questions. His office was in Beverly Hills, all leather and mahogany, and the kind of quiet luxury that whispered rather than shouted. When I arrived that afternoon, he was waiting in his private study, a glass of cognac already poured. Belle, he said, rising to kiss my cheek. You sounded mysterious on the phone. Adrian was 55, silver at the temples, with hands that were steady enough to perform surgery and clever enough to solve problems that required more than medical expertise. We'd had a brief affair 3 years ago, nothing serious, just 2 sophisticated people who understood each other's needs. It had ended amicably when we both realized we were better as collaborators than lovers. I need a consultation, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Not medical. Something more specialized. He poured me cognac without asking, then settled back in his chair.
I'm listening.
Hunter got married last week. I wasn't invited. Adrian's face darkened. He'd met Hunter several times and had made it clear he thought my son was spoiled and entitled.
I'm sorry, Belle.
That must have been devastating. It was illuminating, I corrected. And now they want to spend their honeymoon at my beach house. I'm planning to give them a wedding gift, something that will help them understand the consequences of taking my generosity for granted. I explained what I had in mind. Adrian listened without interruption, his expression never changing, though I caught the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was thinking. What you're describing, he said finally, would require something very specific. Something that would cause significant distress without being immediately identifiable. Something elegant, I agreed. Something that would teach them a lesson about respect and gratitude. He was quiet for a long moment, swirling his cognac. There are certain compounds, he said slowly, that could produce the desired effect. Naturally occurring substances that the body would process normally, leaving no permanent damage, but creating a very memorable experience. How memorable? Intense gastrointestinal distress. Nausea, vomiting, fever, weakness. It would feel like severe food poisoning. Miserable, but not dangerous. The symptoms would last 24 to 48 hours.
Perfect.
Absolutely perfect. And this compound, how would one obtain it? Adrian smiled, the expression of a man who appreciated elegant solutions to complex problems. I might know someone who works with natural toxins for research purposes. Someone discreet who appreciates the finer points of educational experiences. We shook hands like business partners finalizing a deal, which, in a way, we were. 3 days later, I stood in my kitchen at midnight, everything I needed spread across the marble counter like surgical instruments. The Bordeaux, already breathing in a crystal decanter. The small vial Adrian had delivered personally, containing what looked like ordinary salt crystals. A selection of tools that would help me accomplish what I had in mind with the precision of a master craftsman. The beauty of the plan was in its simplicity. Wine was meant to be shared, especially rare wine. What newlyweds could resist opening a $50,000 bottle given as a wedding gift? And if that wine happened to contain something that would make their romantic honeymoon temporarily unpleasant, well, that was just unfortunate timing. I'd researched everything meticulously. The compound Adrian had provided was derived from certain fungi, completely natural, undetectable in alcohol, and metabolized by the body within hours. The symptoms would be intense but temporary, like the worst hangover imaginable combined with food poisoning. Miserable, but not dangerous. Perfect for teaching entitled children about consequences. Working by candlelight, somehow it felt appropriate. I added the crystalline powder to the decanted wine, stirring gently with a silver spoon until it dissolved completely. The Bordeaux maintained its perfect color, its complex bouquet unchanged. Even a sommelier wouldn't notice anything amiss. Then came the delicate task of returning the wine to its original bottle. I'd practiced this with cheaper bottles until I could do it blindfolded, removing the cork without damaging it, refilling the bottle to the exact original level, resealing it so perfectly that not even Hunter's suspicious nature would detect tampering. The final touch was the presentation. I'd found the perfect box, mahogany wood with brass fittings, lined with crimson silk. The bottle nestled inside like a jewel, surrounded by tissue paper and my handwritten note on cream-colored cardstock. To Hunter and Sloane on your marriage. May your love endure as gracefully as this vintage. With all my affection, Isabella. Affection. That was the perfect word. Not love, not warmth, but affection. The kind of polite sentiment one might express to distant relatives or business associates. Let them interpret the coolness however they wished. I sealed the box with black satin ribbon, tied in a perfect bow. Beautiful, elegant, and absolutely lethal to their romantic plans. Sometimes the most effective revenge came wrapped in silk and tied with good intentions. I drove to their penthouse the next morning in my silver Bentley, the mahogany box secured in a velvet-lined carrier beside me. The building was one of those gleaming towers that scrape the sky above Malibu, all glass and steel, and the kind of understated luxury that screamed money to anyone who knew how to look. The doorman recognized me. I'd been here before, back when Hunter still pretended to value my presence in his life. He tipped his cap and waved me through to the private elevator that led to the penthouse floor. But I didn't go up. Instead, I placed the carrier carefully by their door, rang the bell once, and walked away. Let them discover it like a surprise, like something wonderful had just appeared in their lives. The anticipation would make it so much sweeter. From the elevator, I watched through the security mirror as the door opened. Sloane appeared, her blonde hair perfectly tousled in that effortless way that took an hour to achieve, wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her mouth opened in a perfect, "Oh," of surprise when she saw the box. She called for Hunter, and I watched him appear behind her, hair still mussed from sleep, wearing nothing but pajama pants that showed off the body he maintained with expensive personal trainers. Together, they lifted the box and disappeared back inside their apartment. I smiled all the way down to the lobby. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Hunter. "Mom, the wine is incredible. Thank you so much. Sloane is over the moon. You're amazing." I typed back. "Enjoy every drop, darling. You deserve this." And they did. They absolutely did. Now, I want to pause here for a moment because I know some of you might be thinking Belle has gone too far. But before you judge her, remember, this is a woman who gave everything to her son, who was excluded from the most important day of his life, who was treated like hired help instead of family. Sometimes people need to learn that actions have consequences. Stay with us, because Belle's story is just getting started. The beach house sat on 3 acres of prime Malibu coastline, a modernist masterpiece of glass and steel that I designed myself after the divorce. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Pacific, and the master bedroom had a private balcony where you could watch the sun rise over the water. It was the kind of place that appeared in architectural magazines and made people whisper about how much it must have cost. Hunter and Sloane arrived that afternoon, and I knew because I'd had security cameras installed throughout the property. Not for spying, for protection, I'd told myself when I had them put in. But today, they served a different purpose. From my main house 20 miles up the coast, I watched them settle in like they owned the place. Sloane immediately began taking photographs, herself on the deck, herself in the kitchen, herself by the infinity pool that merged seamlessly with the ocean horizon. Each shot carefully composed to suggest this was her natural habitat, her birthright. Hunter opened bottles of champagne Dom Perignon, the same brand Margot and I had shared at lunch. They toasted on the deck as the sun set, golden light turning everything magical, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze that I couldn't hear but could imagine. Then Hunter went inside and returned with my gift. Even through the camera feed, I could see his excitement as he showed Sloane the bottle. She covered her mouth with her hands in that gesture of delighted surprise that looked so natural and was so perfectly calculated. They took selfies with the wine, Sloane holding the bottle like a precious trophy while Hunter wrapped his arms around her from behind. The champagne was finished. The sun had set. The moment was perfect. Hunter opened the Bordeaux with the ceremonial gravity it deserved, using the proper tools I'd left in the kitchen. He poured 2 glasses, the wine dark as garnets in the crystal stemware, then handed one to Sloane with a flourish that would have been charming if he'd learned it from anyone other than me. "To us," he said, raising his glass. "To forever," Sloane replied, her voice carrying that breathless quality of a woman who'd gotten exactly what she wanted. They clinked glasses. They gazed into each other's eyes. They took their first sips of $50,000 wine laced with a very specific kind of education. I poured myself a glass of perfectly ordinary Pinot Grigio and settled into wait. The compound Adrian had provided was designed to work slowly, building in the system over several hours before reaching peak effectiveness. I knew from my research that the first symptoms would appear within 4 to 6 hours of consumption, just long enough for them to finish the bottle and settle in for their romantic evening. I didn't have to wait long for the first sign that my gift was working. At 11:47 p.m., Hunter called. "Mom." His voice was rough, confused. "Something's wrong. We're both feeling sick." I injected just the right note of concern into my voice. "Oh no, darling. What kind of sick?" "Nauseous."
Dizzy.
"Sloan threw up twice already, and I feel like hell. We think it might have been the seafood we had delivered for dinner." Seafood. Of course they'd blame the seafood. It was always easier to blame something external than to consider that their precious lifestyle might have consequences. "Have you taken anything for it?" I asked, the picture of maternal concern. "Some Pepto-Bismol, but it's not helping. We both have fevers now, too." Through the security feed, I could see them moving slowly around the house, Sloan in particular looking pale and unsteady. She kept running to the bathroom, her perfect composure finally cracking under the pressure of her body's rebellion. "Maybe you should see a doctor," I suggested gently. "We called the local emergency room, but they said it sounds like food poisoning and to just rest and stay hydrated unless it gets worse."
Perfect.
The local medical staff would see exactly what they expected to see: 2 people suffering from bad shellfish or contaminated produce. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would require investigation. Just an unfortunate case of poor timing. "I'm so sorry this is happening on your honeymoon," I said, and I almost meant it. Almost. "Is there anything I can do?"
No, ma'am.
"We just need to ride it out. Thanks for checking on us." The call ended, and I returned to my wine and my security feed. By midnight, both of them were down for the count, taking turns rushing to the bathroom, lying on the bathroom floor when the nausea overwhelmed them, holding each other weakly when they had the strength. It was almost poetic. They'd wanted to share my house, my view, my wine. Now they were sharing something else entirely, the understanding that some gifts come with prices attached. I went to bed that night with the ocean breeze flowing through my open windows, sleeping better than I had in months. By the next morning, Hunter and Sloan were deep in the grip of what they believed was the worst food poisoning of their lives. The security feed showed them moving like invalids, weak and shaking, unable to keep down even water. Sloan's Instagram had gone silent. Apparently, severe gastrointestinal distress wasn't photogenic enough for her carefully curated feed. I was having lunch with Margot at the yacht club, both of us wearing white linen and large sun hats, looking like we'd stepped out of a 1960s Grace Kelly film. The yacht club was our sanctuary: old money, quiet conversations, and the kind of discretion that came with membership fees that eliminated the merely wealthy. "Any word from the happy couple?" Margot asked, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. "Hunter called last night. They're both quite ill. Something they ate, apparently." Margot's smile was subtle, but unmistakable. How unfortunate. On their honeymoon, no less. We were discussing the supposed unreliability of seafood delivery services when my phone rang. Hunter's name appeared on the screen, and I could see from Margot's expression that my smile had taken on a particular quality. "Hello, darling," I answered, my voice warm with motherly concern. "Mom." He sounded terrible, hoarse, weak, barely human. "We need help. Sloan is really sick, worse than last night. She can't stop throwing up, and she's burning up with fever. I tried to drive her to the hospital, but I nearly passed out behind the wheel." I made appropriate concerned noises while catching Margot's eye across the table. She raised her wine glass in a tiny salute. "This sounds serious, Hunter. Have you called for an ambulance? The local paramedics came by this morning. They said our vital signs were stable and it was probably just severe food poisoning, but they gave us some fluids and anti-nausea medication. He paused to cough, a sound that suggested his throat was raw from vomiting. But we're not getting better, Mom. If anything, we're getting worse. Oh, sweetheart, I said, layering my voice with exactly the right amount of maternal anxiety. Do you want me to call Dr. Blackwell? He might be able to recommend someone local, or even come down himself if necessary. There was silence on the other end, filled only by what sounded like Sloane retching in the background.
Poor thing.
She'd probably never been genuinely sick a day in her privileged life. Would you? Hunter's voice was small, defeated. I don't know what else to do. We were supposed to be having the perfect honeymoon, and instead we're dying in paradise. Of course, darling. Let me make some calls and see what I can arrange. In the meantime, try to keep sipping small amounts of water and electrolyte solution. Thanks, Mom. I'm sorry to bother you with this.
Sorry to bother me. Now he was sorry to bother me.
When he wanted something, when he was suffering, suddenly I wasn't just a key dispenser. I was Mom again. You could never be a bother, Hunter. You're my son. I ended the call and immediately signaled for more wine. The afternoon was turning out better than expected. So, Margot said, her voice carefully neutral, will you be calling Dr. Blackwell? Eventually, I said, savoring both my wine and the moment. But I think I'll let them suffer a bit longer first. After all, good wine should be properly appreciated, and education takes time. Margot laughed, the sound carrying across the water like wind chimes. Belle Van Doren, you are absolutely terrible. I prefer thorough. I corrected, then raised my glass to catch the afternoon light. To proper appreciation of gifts given. Before we get to the conclusion of Belle's story, I want to remind you that if you're enjoying her true stories, this is exactly the kind of content we bring you every single week. Real women, real situations, real consequences. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And please, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. We all know people who take others for granted. Now, let's see how Belle's perfectly planned lesson comes to its end. The call came 3 days later, just as I was finishing my morning yoga session on the deck. The sun was painting the sky in shades of gold and coral, and the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, beautiful and merciless, as nature intended. Mrs. Van Doren? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. This is Dr. Rebecca Santos from Malibu General Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Hunter Van Doren. My heart skipped, but not with panic, with anticipation. Yes, doctor. How is he? Both Mr. Van Doren and his wife were brought in early this morning by ambulance. They're stable now, but they've been severely dehydrated and weak from what appears to be an aggressive case of food poisoning. Food poisoning? Yes, though I have to say, it's one of the more severe cases I've seen recently. We got them on 4 fluids and anti-nausea medication, and they should recover fully, but it's going to take several days. Several days.
Perfect.
May I ask what they think caused it? They mentioned eating shellfish from a local restaurant, but honestly, Mrs. Van Doren, the symptoms seem to have lasted longer and been more intense than typical food poisoning. We're running some additional tests just to be thorough. I made all the appropriate maternal noises, concern, relief that they were stable, offers to drive down immediately. Dr. Santos assured me they were in good hands and that Hunter would call when he was feeling stronger. I hung up and immediately called Margot. They're in the hospital, I announced without preamble. Both of them. Severe dehydration, apparently. The doctor says they'll recover fully, but it will take several days. There was a pause, then Margot's delighted laughter. Belle, you magnificent creature. How do you feel? How did I feel? I walked to my floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the ocean that had been my witness and my sanctuary for so many years. I felt complete, satisfied in a way I hadn't been since Hunter's phone call had shattered my peaceful morning. I feel like justice has been served, I said finally. The hospital released Hunter and Sloane 2 days later, both pale, weak, and thoroughly chastened. Their romantic honeymoon had turned into a nightmare of 4 drips and hospital gowns, shared bathrooms, and the kind of unglamorous suffering that didn't photograph well for social media. Hunter called to thank me for offering to drive down, his voice still rough but considerably more humble than I'd heard it in years. "Mom, I'm sorry we worried you. And thank you for offering to come. I know you would have dropped everything." Would have. Past tense. As if my willingness to sacrifice for him was something historical rather than ongoing. "Of course, darling. I'm just glad you're both all right. The wine you gave us was amazing, by the way. We finished the whole bottle that first night before we got sick." "Thank you for such an incredible gift." "You're very welcome," I said, meaning it more than he could possibly understand. "I'm so glad you enjoyed it." That evening, I hosted a dinner party for 8 close friends, including Margot. We dined on my terrace as the sun set over the Pacific, the table set with my finest crystal and silver, candles flickering in the gentle breeze. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine. 2 bottles of perfectly ordinary but excellent Bordeaux that wouldn't poison anyone, wouldn't teach anyone lessons, wouldn't do anything but complement the perfectly prepared meal. As dessert was being served, a delicate lemon tart with fresh berries, I raised my glass of champagne and looked around the table at these people who had earned their place in my life through years of loyalty and genuine affection. To the beauty of savoring every drop, I said, the words carrying meanings that only Margot fully understood. Everyone raised their glasses, and the crystals sang as we toasted. Around the table, conversations resumed. Art, travel, books, the 1,000 small pleasures that made life worth living when you were surrounded by people who valued your presence rather than your possessions. Later, after the guests had gone home and Margot had helped me blow out the candles, we stood on my deck looking out at the moonlight on the water. "Any regrets?" she asked. I considered the question seriously. Hunter and Sloane would recover completely, physically at least. Their marriage would probably survive, though I suspected the memory of their disastrous honeymoon would linger. They'd learned that some gifts came with prices, that gratitude wasn't optional, that treating people like servants had consequences. "None," I said finally. "Not a single one." In my wine cellar, another rare bottle waited on the rack, a 1985 Krug that I'd been saving for the right occasion. Perhaps I'd open it when Hunter eventually called to apologize properly, to acknowledge what he'd put me through, to recognize that love shouldn't be conditional on what someone could provide. Or perhaps I'd save it for something else entirely. After all, life was full of lessons waiting to be taught, and I discovered I had quite a talent for education. The ocean crashed against the cliffs below, eternal and patient, and absolutely unforgiving to those who didn't respect its power. I smiled, listening to its symphony, and went inside to plan my next vintage selection. Some wines, after all, improved with age. And so, apparently, did revenge. Thank you for listening to another Her True Stories. What did you think of Belle's perfectly planned revenge? Do you think Hunter and Sloane learned their lesson, or do you think some people never change? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If Belle's story resonated with you, if you've ever been taken for granted by family or felt invisible despite your sacrifices, you're not alone. Hit that like button if this story spoke to you. Subscribe for more tales of women taking back their power, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Remember, beautiful souls, your worth isn't determined by what you can provide for others. You deserve respect, gratitude, and genuine love. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I'm your host, and I'll see you in the next Her True Stories. Until then, keep standing in your truth and never let anyone dim your light. 6 months after their disastrous honeymoon, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, tending to the white roses that climbed the trellis overlooking the ocean, when Maria announced that Sloane was at the door. She looked different, thinner, less polished, with dark circles under her eyes that even expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer ensemble. "Mrs. Van Doren," she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "Could we talk?" I invited her to the terrace, served tea in my finest china, and waited. Patience, I'd learned, was often the most powerful weapon in any conversation. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally, her hands wrapped around her teacup like a lifeline. "For the wedding. For not insisting that Hunter invite you. For taking your generosity for granted." "What's brought this on?" I asked, genuinely curious. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the waves. "Hunter and I have been having problems since the honeymoon. The whole experience, it changed something between us. Made us look at each other differently." "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" She looked at me directly for the first time since she'd arrived. "Because I've been thinking about that wine you gave us. $50,000 for a wedding gift you weren't even invited to? It seemed excessive." I sipped my tea, keeping my expression neutral. "It was a special vintage. I thought you deserved something memorable." "Memorable?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's certainly what it was. We've never been able to figure out what made us so sick. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with the food we ate. But that wine, we drank the whole bottle that first night, right before we got sick." "Unfortunate timing," I said mildly. She studied my face, searching for something. "Hunter doesn't suspect anything. He still thinks it was food poisoning. But I've been researching that wine, Mrs. Van Doren. A 1967 Chateau Margaux in perfect condition? There are maybe a dozen bottles left in the world. You could have bought a car with what that bottle was worth." "I could have," I agreed. "But cars depreciate. Lessons, on the other hand, tend to appreciate over time." We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the rocks below. Finally, Sloane spoke again. "He's filing for divorce." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not." She set down her teacup with shaking hands. "And honestly, neither am I. You were right about him, Mrs. Van Doren. About us. We were using you, taking advantage of your love for him. I convinced myself I deserved everything he could give me, including your house, your wine, your generosity. I never stopped to think about what it cost you. And now? Now I'm 27 years old, unemployed, and facing a divorce from a man whose mother terrifies me more than any prenup ever could." She smiled ruefully. "I suppose that's justice." I reached across the table and touched her hand gently. "Sloane, you're young, beautiful, and clearly intelligent enough to recognize your mistakes. That's more than many people manage in a lifetime. What will you do now?" "I don't know. Go back to Colorado, maybe. Start over. Try to become someone worthy of the kindness you showed us, even when we didn't deserve it." After she left, I called Margot. "The girl came to see me," I said. "Sloane. And she figured it out. Not the details, but enough." "What did you tell her?" I poured myself a glass of wine. Ordinary wine, nothing special, nothing dangerous, and settled into my favorite chair by the window. I told her that lessons appreciate over time. Margot laughed. "And Hunter?" "Still oblivious. Still entitled. Still my son, unfortunately. Any regrets now?" I thought about Sloane's thin face, her genuine remorse, the way she'd looked when she admitted her mistakes. I thought about Hunter, who would probably never understand what he'd lost, who would go on taking and expecting and never learning. About Sloane? Yes, actually. She deserved better than she got from both of us. And Hunter? I smiled, watching the sun set over the water in shades of gold and crimson. Hunter got exactly what he deserved. No more, no less. In my wine cellar, dozens of bottles waited in perfect temperature-controlled silence. Some were meant for celebration, others for commiseration, and a few were meant for education. I'd learned that revenge, like fine wine, was best served with patience, precision, and an appreciation for the subtle art of consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for teaching me that actions have consequences. I'll try to do better.
Ass.
I deleted the message and finished my wine, listening to the ocean's eternal song. Some lessons, it seemed, actually took. Others would require more time, more patience, more carefully chosen vintages. But I had both time and patience in abundance. And my wine cellar was very, very well stocked. This has been Her True Stories, where we explore the complex realities of family, betrayal, and the price of taking love for granted. If you enjoyed Belle's story of elegant revenge, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. We have more incredible stories coming your way. Remember, your worth isn't measured by what you can give others, but by how you honor yourself when they try to take more than they deserve. Stay strong, beautiful souls, and we'll see you next time.